when you die, you reach the end of what you are. You have an extension, and when you come to the end of that extension, there's no more of you to be had, right? That's you. And now that you is going to be judged. It's going to be judged in the sense that there's no more you to change whatever it is that happened before, right? You could see it that way. It's like, so you come to the end, and now everything, it's like you don't want to judge a basketball game until it's finished, right? Once the game is finished, then you can say, oh, now we know who won. Now we know who lost. Now we know how everybody played. Because until then, you could always have a break where someone all of a sudden plays amazing. You never know what can happen until the final moment. And so the idea that when you die, you go to heaven or hell is to understand that it.
What are some, I guess, sacred values or things that kind of you've tried to, I guess, build your life around that are precious?
You could say understanding that we're in a story is something that has been a big deal for me, and trying to identify what that story is that we're part of, um there's a strange kind of inevitable aspect to it, but once you embrace it, then it's a very positive thing. And I think that I realize that the cause, at least one of the big causes of Western civilization, is that we're in a uh, a Christian story, um, and that the advent of the Christian story has transformed the horizon of how people understood what a person is, how people understood what is important, what our values are. And so I think that really understanding that and trying to live that out as much as possible has been the foundation for a lot of secondary things, which is, embracing the values that brings about, and embracing the kind of mode of being that suggests. But I think the most important part is to understand the reality of that story. And maybe one last thing is also understanding how, in order to get out of that story, you have to take a certain posture, a certain oppositional posture, which I think is counterproductive, and I think leads to dark places.
Are, I guess, principles of, for instance, the Enlightenment, like, for instance, empiricism, the empirical study, the scientific method, are they counter to storytelling, to grand narratives, or are they complementary? Can they be matched up?
I think so. I think they can be matched up. I think sadly, one of the things that happened was that for some people, at least, they were set up as oppositional. Not for everybody who even developed that method, not for all the scientists, but there's a kind of cultural narrative that led to, like 19th century materialism and even the new atheist movement, which is that there's opposition between the two. But I think that what empiricism offers is a capacity to predict phenomena, to quantify and predict phenomena in a manner that is accurate. And that is very helpful. It's very useful. It's a great power, but it does not provide the frame in which that happens. It actually doesn't even provide the identities in which that happens. It doesn't provide the care which makes you choose what it is you're going to apply the method to. And that is where stories and more and a different tool set comes in handy. And I think it's important to have both, because if we just have one, which is just the story tool set, at some point the story drifts from phenomena so much that you end up with a kind of schizophrenic lifestyle. But the other side is true, that if you only focus on empirical sciences, then you have a kind of blind side. You can't see what it is that's motivating your decisions, and what it is that makes you care about this or that, or value this or this over that. And so you need both at the same time.
And how much of, for instance, modern science, um, do you see as kind of just confirming many of the wisdom traditions. Like I was going back and reading just a number of scientific studies on things like awe, you know, exercise, gratitude, all of these things that would have been talked about millennia ago, and people dedicate entire bodies of funding to proving why these things are beneficial. So, how much of science is kind of proving what was already wrote about long
Yeah.
before us?
This is really a good place to go because one of the things that happened, you could say, um, one of the things that happened is you could say at first the scientists applied their method to the external world, right? Understanding the physics of motion, understanding, what things are made of in terms of their components. And so there was a kind of, I could say, what was set up was a kind of arrogance, you could say to some extent, where it's like, oh, we're mastering this, like we're on top of this, we understand this, this is something that religion could never provide. This is something that the storytelling could never provide. But then when you start to turn the lens back on the human person and everything that has to do with the human person, especially today, cognition itself and the relationship between cognition and other aspects of human living, then things become a lot trickier. And it seems to me that the right now we're in an interesting moment where a lot of religious practices are coming back in through secular thinking, whether it's fasting, whether it's, like you said, gratitude, meditation. There are all these things that are trying to kind of create a pseudo religious practice of decentralized practices that sometimes it's not totally clear what the ultimate goal is. Feel better, be fit, more fit, all of these things. But usually the idea is that in a religious framework, all of these secondary goods, like just feeling good in your body, just feeling more, feeling free from bad thoughts, like all these type of practices, they're aimed towards something that's coherent. They're kind of brought together, even in terms of society, in terms of your connection to your family, connection to the world around you. They're kind of brought together. Whereas now we have this kind of weird factitious practices, or not factitious, but I mean, um, it's like people are discovering that fasting is important, and so they're creating these like fast schedules, and they're realizing that meditation or breathing calmly or just being still is important. And you're like, well, it used to be called prayer, and it used to just be part of life, but
And when you hear things like that and you see those kind of patterns about, I guess, science confirming the traditions, in your view, does that kind of strengthen your hypothesis about what we talked about the first time, where you kind of talked about the inevitability of religion? Does that kind of strengthen your argument, your thinking in that sense?
I mean, I think so. I think so. I think that what we're going to see, and as we move forward, because this is in some ways a lot of these are new phenomena. A lot of this cognitive science is quite new, and the problem of emergence and the problem of complexity, all of these are recent. Maybe from after World War II, where it's become more important to talk about these questions. But what we're going to see emerge, I think, is more and more religious thinking and a weirder religious thinking. Like we're going to see techno religions. That seems it might already be there. With the advent of AI, it is possible that even though the external trope of religion, like we won't necessarily have buildings. What can I say? Is we won't have buildings and all of this thing, but for all intents and purposes, people will worship AI in the sense that they will place it as the highest purveyor of value, and they will follow whatever it gives them. And so that's religious posture, no matter what.
I'm curious about something that we talked a little bit about just now, and that was kind of the limits, I guess, or perhaps the downsides of hyper empiricism. And it took me back to two conversations that I had. The first was with Daka Keltner, a professor in California who was studying and researching awe. And I was in two minds actually about conducting the interview because I'd had a conversation just a couple of weeks earlier with Iain McGilchrist, brilliant man. And I remember that McGilchrist said to me, never make a beautiful thing explicit,
Yeah.
because when you break it down to its parts, you rob it of its power, love, romance, mystery. He said, conversely, if you take the worst parts, death, disease, he said you should make those things explicit. So I'm curious, do you agree with that about not making beautiful things kind of explicit?
I think that the word explicit, yeah, we need to understand what the word explicit is, which is you could say the focusing on the constituents of something is, if that's what he means, then I totally agree.
Yes, yeah.
Because when you focus on constituents of something, you actually are moving away from the gestalt, right? It's unitary reality, the thing that makes it one. Um, and you can see it like Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's like his one move. That's his one philosophical move, is to take something meaningful and then show what it's made of, like just describe the parts, and then thinks that it annuls the meaning of it. And you see that it's like just a reductionist. It's such a reductionist move, but it works because if you think of, like, we could take a simple example, like if I say that, oh, kissing is exchanging saliva with another person, and it's like, well, that's disgusting. What the hell? Like, it's like sex is exchanging body fluids. That's what sex is. It's like when you reduce it to like its crass constituents, then all of a sudden it loses what it is, in the sense that obviously kissing is not exchanging saliva with someone. Like it actually moves towards the encountering of a person, of their face, like you're coming close to the person. Like there's all these analogies about how when we kiss someone, what it is that we're doing, that the taking the thing that makes meaning and bringing it close to the other person, taking the thing that also is the way in which you enter things into your body and bringing it close to the person. Like that's what's happening when you're kissing someone. And exchanging saliva, it's the mechanics of it, but it does reduce it in a way that you lose what it is that's actually happening when you're doing it.
And is it reasonable to say that it's a fair hypothesis that continuously breaking things down to take beautiful things, robbing them of their meaning, as you said, taking them to their constituents in the deGrasse Tyson kind of way, is it reasonable to say that that may perhaps foster nihilism?
That is what nihilism is. But there's a trick, right? And the thing about the Neil deGrasse Tyson move is that it really is a trick. I mean, it's actually is not coherent, because what you do is you actually just reduce something to the constituents that inform that high level. So you just bring it down one level. So for example, you say, you know, kissing someone is exchanging saliva, but you don't say kissing someone is a quantum field, because then what, right? You don't bring it all the way down to, let's say, its most constitutive structure, because what is that even, what would that even be? And so it's a trick, because exchanging saliva is also something that has identity, also something that has meaning. And if you so when you break things down, you're moving towards nihilism. It's a dangerous move to make, but a way to help your way out of it is that even the elements that you break things down to are also meaningful. And you would have to keep breaking it down, breaking it down, breaking down to something which is actually even totally unrecognizable to the place you started, and would just be randomness, basically. And so it's important to understand that when I say that, it's not just like we're trying to comfort ourselves. Like you're trying to comfort yourself with the idea that these things have meaning. It's that things have meaning all the way through, all the way down, and you can't avoid it. Meaning is inevitable.
How do we know perhaps when to stop? Because McGilchrist, he obviously made the case that, avoid doing this process with beautiful things, do it with the worst things in existence,
Mm.
death, disease, he gave the arguments for. Is it that simple of just to take the things that you don't want to give power to? Is that what we do with it?
That's an interesting idea. I never heard that as a possible solution. I think it's a fascinating one. It'd be one that it would be worth thinking about more. Um, you know, I would say like it would be dangerous to do that in terms of evil. I can understand why you would want to do it in terms of death and disease, because evil is usually, you don't want to break it down too much with constituents, because it actually is a form of deranged meaning. Evil is a form of twisted meaning making, and so you want to be able to capture it at the right level. You want to oppose it. Like if you would say that I don't know, someone who robbed you, you have to be careful. Like if you just say, well, it's just an event that happened and it's this and that particle that hit this and that particle, you won't have the strength to oppose it. But I understand what he's saying, and I think that there's definitely something right about his intuition.
We spoke before, and a part of the conversation that I think really resonated with people was a kind of discussion that we had about heaven and hell. And I'm curious, in your work, how do you kind of approach I guess, the representation of, heaven and hell in your work? Kind of what are those key concepts?
If you mean in my like artistic work, there's definitely a iconology of heaven and hell, and it's related, you could say, to it's related, you could say, to what we just talked about, which is in some ways, like as you move towards heaven, you're moving towards good, you're moving towards beauty, you're moving towards um unity, a kind of choir symphony of being together. And as you move towards hell, you're moving towards fragmentation, breakdown, opposition, rebellion, all of these images of things that break unity down. Sometimes they can also be represented as secondary goods that are becoming idols, right? So you can have obsessions that are related to hell, which is why you have like, the idea of the seven deadly sins, or and if you look at representations of hell in Renaissance painting, or even to some extent medieval paintings, you'll often have the punishment in hell as a mirror of the obsession, right? So you could say that in some ways, that if you become obsessed with something, then the thing itself is the punishment, and usually it's represented as a kind of inversion where now the thing is doing something to you, or you're being punished in an ironic way, which is related to the obsession that you have. And people think it's just some kind of like a kind of weird trope, but it's not a weird trope. It actually is what happens when you become obsessed with something, that the way in which it makes you suffer is related to the thing that you're obsessed with, right? It's like if you're obsessed with making money, it's the side effects of making a lot of money which will cause you pain, and you'll feel more pain because all you care about is money. And so all of a sudden the side effects of that will cause you way more pain. So if you're obsessed with sex, then the side effects of being obsessed with sex, whether it is at some point losing, becoming impotent, or not having any pleasure anymore, or becoming deluded, that is going to pain you extremely, because it's not it and it's like you're trying to fill it's the idea of the god-shaped hole. You're trying to fill a god-shaped hole with something which isn't the right side. You're trying to fit all your desire into something that can't fill it. And so usually those are the images of hell. And also breakdown of identity. So you have demons who are represented either as dark, in the sense that they lack light, or as mixture, in the sense that they lack identity. So they're often, like a human with like bat wings, or like the face of a pig or whatever. Like they're just different ways of representing the idea that you're moving away from clarity, identity, goodness, to confusion, breakdown, hybridity, all that stuff.
And one of the interesting things for me there was that when you were describing heaven and hell, you were talking about them in terms of, moving towards, we're going in a direction of, as opposed to a place. And I suppose that seems kind of, counter to, you growing up and perhaps you're not kind of familiar with these things. Many people think you just, you die, you cease to be conscious, and then you're up or you're down. So I'm just kind of curious, perhaps, is that kind of how you visage it? It's not a place we go to, it's it's a direction, it's a movement. Is
Yeah.
that kind of what where you were alluding to?
Let's say people don't like the idea that it's a place. Okay. A place that you go after you die. All right. So let's take it that way. Uh, you know, the let's imagine like when you die, you don't have a body anymore, which means that you are spirit, right? So if you're a spirit, like you don't have body, then what does it mean to say it's a place? What are you referring to? Right. And so you saying it's a place is it's an analogical description of something. That is, it is the best way to understand what it is that we're talking about, but obviously it cannot be a physical place for something that doesn't have body. Right. It's like if and so but understanding it as a place is a good way to understand it, and understanding it analogically to our experience of up and down, right? The way in which we experience the heavens and the way that we experience the idea of something rotting underground is the best analogy to what that is. And so why do we people say that when you die you go to heaven and go to hell? What is that? Why do we say that? Well, there's a reason why we say that. Actually, the Orthodox Christians don't really believe it as simply as that, like the idea that when you die, you go to heaven or hell. But there is something to be understood there, which is that when you die, you reach the end of what you are, right? So you have an extension, and when you come to the end of that extension, there's no more of you to be had, right? That's you. And now that you is going to be judged. It's going to be judged in the sense that there's no more you to change whatever it is that happened before, right? You could see it that way. It's like, so you come to the end and now everything, it's like you don't want to judge a basketball game until it's finished, right? Once the game is finished, then you can say, oh, now we know who won. Now we know who lost. Now we know how everybody played. Because until then, you could always have a break where someone all of a sudden plays amazing. You never know what can happen until the final moment. And so the idea that when you die, you go to heaven or hell is to understand that it is the totality of you, which is revealing what it is. It's revealing where you are. So, if you your entire life can be evaluated as being a horrible person that was selfish and murderous and did all these horrible things, then literally you are not, that's where you are. Like, it's just, that's where you are. That's what you are. Maybe you could say it that way. And if you see it as someone who was gracious and loving and gave, and generous and did all these things, then it's like, well, that's what you are. And so a lot of people will think, even Christians won't like what I'm saying now, because they'll think, what about the possibility of changing after the death of your physical body? But if you want to understand the image of what it means that when you end your life, you go up or down, that is what it means. And it also means that in some ways, you, like I said, you can't change anymore, and you also can't imagine, you can't pretend, right? Imagine your body's taken away, all the things around that are built around you for us to not be able to see who you really are, in terms of who you are, in terms of your virtue, in terms of where you are, in terms of your mindfulness, in terms of your capacity to be distracted or whatever. Imagine you take that veil away. Now I could see you. I could see all the bad things you did, all the good things you did, all of that. And then that is being evaluated. That is where this kind of idea comes from.
Follow-up question to that. I mean, you give some examples there, but what are, I guess, some kind of ways, some things that people may be doing that may move them in either direction, in your opinion, of course?
Yeah. Well, I think most people really know. They just they know intuitively what that is. When you give yourself to your sins, when you give yourself to your obsessions, when you let them take over you, then you can feel, if you're attentive, you can usually feel the dying. Like, a good one is as simple as like resentment. Like, when you kind of give yourself into resentment, you can feel yourself fall apart if you're careful and you pay attention to it. Because if let's say you're resentful towards one person, that resentment is also, it's not just like one isolated thing, right? It's a posture and it's a mode of being. And then that resentment, you can't really totally isolate it. It's going to start to seep into the rest of your life. And if you're not careful, it will make you resentful in general. And then that is what you are. It means that you're isolating yourself from others, you are alone, you're angry, you blame everybody for your own faults and stuff. And so it's like that's moving towards hell. Like it's really moving towards hell. It's an objective thing that you can observe in someone if they go down that path, what it does to them. And the opposite is true, which is that if you are grateful, if you are, you try to see your own fault and you always try to correct them as much as you can, or at least be mindful of your faults and acknowledge when you're struggling to change them. That type of posture will bring you into relationships of love with others. And that is what heaven is, right? Heaven is being unified in love with others towards something which transcends us. And so if you live in that way, then you will be free, you'll be happy, and you'll be closer to heaven, like just in terms of practice. But there's one more thing too. I would say that faith is important, um, in the sense that not just in a very naive idea that like believe in this and this will happen to you, right? That's a little simplistic. And it's okay for some people to have that level of understanding, that like it's totally fine. I don't want to denigrate that idea, but um, faith is the trust of things unseen, right? It is the conviction of things unseen, which is that it's the capacity to still look up when things look broken, right? The capacity to trust that ultimately, you know, aiming towards that which is good and seeing that will bring things together. It's the ontological jump between multiple and one, when you can't see, you don't totally grasp the one. It's like, I know this doesn't make sense now. I know this doesn't make sense, but I trust that God, is providential. And no matter what happens, it will bring me into, and that is actually a posture I think that is very important to. I mean, you could say it's just gratitude too, like the process of gratitude that a lot of people talk about. That is also a good way to interpret it also, maybe, where it's like, and even though things are difficult around you, you try to see that the good thing that is there is what's driving you. The good thing that you see in your life is your shining light, and you need to look at that rather than look at all the messiness around you.
Yeah, man, beautifully said. And I would love to kind of ask you, I guess, one thing as you were describing that, and it took me back to a conversation that I had with Anna Lembke, who is uh, she's a psychiatrist and a medical researcher at Stanford, and she wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, all about the reward system, and she talked about addiction and how people become addicted and what they can do to free it. And I was amazed when I read the book and when I spoke to her, because she's quite a serious, esteemed scientist, and she told me about of all the modern treatments. She said what she noticed really transformed people was going through 12 steps.
Hmm.
I'm going through, for instance, AA or any of these other programs. And she said that some of the transformations that came from it was just, unbelievable. So I'm just curious, why do you think that works? Is it kind of filling a spiritual void? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 12 steps are based on, kind of just basic Christian principles. The idea is that you have to recognize that there's something above you. That's the first step, and it's a very important step because this is the faith that I'm talking to you about, right? It's the idea that no matter, and it's related to the very first question about one and many, which is that you have to be able to understand that there, even though now it looks like it's this whirlwind swirling of desires and nihilism and self-destructiveness, that there is something calling me up out of that. And that's something which is above. It's moving me from multiplicity into one. And that already is a massive thing. Like, it's a massive idea. And then, of course, the idea of being truthful and understanding that, and also finding a community of people that are truthful about things and are willing to not pretend, and won't pretend to save face or to do whatever, but that they're willing to be truthful in order to be healed from their, like, all of these things are very beautiful. Like, they're related to confession in the church, the idea of faith and of communion. All of these things are kind of a secular version of what should happen in a religious context.
One of the steps, I believe, when I read it, was something like, something akin to finding people that, you had wrong and where possible, making amends to people. And I could imagine that being quite transformative, kind of at a spiritual level. I guess that's another perhaps classic principle.
This whole image, when Jesus says, if you're going to offer a sacrifice, but you have animosity towards your brother, then put your sacrifice down, go ask for forgiveness, or go solve the problem, so that you can then, offer what you need to offer up to God. And just the image also of saying, not going to bed angry, like not letting the sun set on your anger, which is a kind of traditional Christian way of seeing the world. That, of course, this is real, because you have to, things have to happen simultaneously, right? It's like, if you just try to do this vertical thing where you're just wanting to get out of your problem and you want to solve your addiction into something better, but you don't realize that there's a relationship between that vertical and the horizontal, which is your relationship with others and the way you treat others, and that you won't be able to do it. That everything is, all of those things are related together, right? Who is it that said that the solution to addiction is not sobriety, it's communion, right? It's
Mm.
connection. That's the solution to addiction.
We talked, I guess, a little bit about, I guess, kind of moving towards heaven and the kind of things we can do there. I'm curious, if we talk about hell and perhaps, I guess, Satanism, how does that kind of, I guess, function in modern society? What does that kind of look like?
What does Satanism look like?
Yeah.
um so the can I say this? It's Satanism, especially most modern Satanism, is what it is. It's just secularism, which is veiled in religious practice. And so a lot of the modern Satanists, including Anton LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible, understands that the attitude of rebelling towards authority, the attitude of questioning the story, questioning your allegiance, questioning all these things, this is the structure of secular society, of like revolutionary secular society. And because of that, they basically said, well, Satan is the good guy then, but the opposer, the questioner, he's the hero of the story. um and so there's something about their intuition which is right, but there's a coherence to kind of satanic symbolism, uh, which is a kind of upside down Christianity. And so as the world moves away from Christianity, or tries to free itself from Christianity, the trope of Satanism will inevitably become more pervasive, either overtly or covertly, it doesn't matter, because this is, it's like, it's hard for people to think this way if they don't understand how it works. But if you're living in a story, right, and you want to free yourself from the basic drive of the story, you can't totally do it without taking the role of that which in the story is the bad guy, or trying to move away from the meaning of the story, right? It's like That's just how it works. You can't just jump out of something and then just create something completely new. So because of that, the tropes of Satanism become more and more evident, and I think that they will become more and more accepted, like just culturally. Uh, what in the 1980s, if you remember, like the satanic panic of the rock bands that took on all this satanic imagery and were using it in their rock shows as a form of rebellion. And it was like, and everybody was scared, and all the pastors were freaking out, and they're like, what's happening, and all of these horrible things are going on. um Now it's just normal fare, my friend. At every single award show, every single thing, a pop star will do a full-on satanic show. And it's not even like, now it's just, this is actually culture, right? This is actually normal culture. And this is, you could say, that's the movement that we're looking at. So and what Satanism is, it's very simple. It is the opposite of the Christian vision. And what it usually centers on is the idea that I am God. That's what it's pretty simple. Instead of understanding, so the Christian vision is to understand that I have to give up, right? I am not God, and I receive from heaven that which is the good. And I have to align myself towards that good, and I have to align my will towards that good. I have to sacrifice my own idiosyncratic desires to that good, and that life flows from that, right? So the understanding is that if I can subjugate my desires to something better, then those desires will be more fulfilled, right? And it's a pretty simple thing. It's like, if I become obsessed with eating, then I will suffer. At some point I won't enjoy food anymore. But if I subjugate my desire for food and my desire for pleasure in food to my love of others, and to the time I spend together with my family, then it's embedded in something higher, and you can keep kind of doing that. Satanism is the idea that I am God. I am the ultimate thing, right? Do thy will is the first of the law, which is the kind of the premise of the kind of occultist of Luciferianism. Um, and then it looks like what it looks. It looks like hyper control. It looks like uh, power. It looks like imposing my will on others, uh, no matter what. And so, you could say, as the elites of our world leave their Christian story and, embrace a secular vision of the world, those elites will, become satanic, not necessarily explicitly in the sense that they'll be involved in like rituals or whatever. Maybe they will, who knows, but they'll become at least implicitly satanic in the sense that the only thing left is my will to power and the capacity to make my will happen. So it means that we're gonna move towards more control no matter what. Like this whole system is going to move towards, because that's the image of Satan, is a rebel that then wants to control once he's gained power. It's not just a rebel, just not just a rock rebel. It's something like a tyrant that tries to take power from the higher part, and then now tries to control everything below, right? If you think of the Greek mythology, you have an image of that structure where right, Saturn castrates heaven, right? Cuts his balls off, and then he becomes now the head of the structure. Like, it's like I've cut myself off from that which gives me authority, gives me identity, this highest thing, and now I become the king. But in order to be the king, because I did it that way, my legitimacy is only my power. The only thing that legitimizes me is my power. And so in order to have control, I have to eat my children. And so Saturn eats his children in order to control them. And so you can imagine that, like, if you think of a structure where the system says, we don't need this transcendent good. All we need is will to power. All we need is the capacity to hold things together. and then that system will inevitably become more and more controlling. It's just inevitable in the very structure, especially systems that were born in revolution. Systems that were born in revolution immediately move towards tyranny because of that problem, which is that I've decided that I'm the chief, I'm the one in charge, but I've auto declared myself. I have auto defined myself, and so Satanism will always be kind of self naming. You'll see that a lot in the satanic tropes. Like, I want to define who I am. I get to decide. I get to decide who my name is, what my pronouns are, what my this is that. I decide. It's me. But that's actually not how reality works. To honestly, but it's all these images of what when the opponent takes over the narrative, what the opposer takes over the narrative.
How do you think, I guess, because you kind of alluded to it there about, I guess, what you would call post-enlightenment thinking, or I guess secularism. How are they changing social and moral structures within society?
Well, the post-enlightenment thinking is already there in the Enlightenment. In some ways, it's a trick, because the Enlightenment has within itself, the magical elements that it tries to also keep on the edge. And so within the Freemasonry is an Enlightenment thing. I don't know what to tell these
Yeah,
folks.
yeah.
And then secret societies and occultism, the advent of the occultist is an Enlightenment phenomena. And sometimes the people, Newton both derived all these amazing laws of physics, but then also spent all of his life doing hermeticism and studying Egyptian mysteries and doing all of this stuff. It's like it's right there in the outset. Descartes, said was a rationalist, but he spent most of his life looking for the Rosicrucians and being in contact with the Rosicrucians. So it's like this is the weird secret about the Enlightenment, is that it has in it the post-enlightenment. It's kind of it's alongside with it, right? And so Marquis de Sade is an enlightenment thinker, but Marquis de Sade is post-enlightenment in the sense that he comes to the end of the rational part of the enlightenment, and then the irrational bursts out and starts to manifest itself, right? And so the problem what we have now is that in some ways you can't plug the holes anymore. You're trying to plug all the holes. And then while you're doing that, it's just the water just keeps coming in, and now we're just drowning. Now we're drowning in weird identity stuff, in in post-human ideas where we imagine the idea of becoming more than a human as a kind of deification, as a type of religious ecstasy, when we're trying to build a god out of AI. All of these things in some ways are the dark side or the flip side of the Enlightenment that are now becoming so screaming at us so loud that we can't ignore it anymore, and they're kind of taking over. And so my contention has been that we have to be deliberate about this. And so for those that just want to close their eyes and say, no, 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 secular, secular, no, 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 rational, 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 it's like, well, you can do that, until the day that the AI God puts you in jail for blasphemy. But this is not helpful. Like, we have to actually just keep our eyes open and be aware of what's going on, and understand that as the irrational and as the desire for ecstasy and participation and transcendence is coming back into reality, kind of flooding back, we have to be able to speak into it in a way that is the best way. And I do believe that how can I say this? I do believe that most of the return of these types of things that are happening are technically, you could say, antichrist, which is that they are the end of Christianity, and they are the deconstruction of Christianity. And this will happen explicitly, like you said, first of all, through satanic tropes. That is, that the satanic tropes will now start to appear around us, where it's like, what? These people like explicitly saying they're Satanists, like, what's going on? Or the arrival of Wicca and witchcraft, where people are are saying they're the witches. Like, those witches that supposedly you killed in the early modern period. It's like, that's us. Well, it's not them historically. Like, there's no connection between them. But the desire to take the position of that which is Antichrist. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a narrative problem. And so this is what we'll see. So I think that people have to, at some point, will have to kind of decide what part they're going to play in this. Like, will they play an Antichrist part, or will they be able to my gamble, not a gamble, but like my position has been, we need to go back into the Christian tradition and make it as salient and as full of the highest meaning possible. We don't make it, we find it. It's there. The treasure is there, and help that guide us into the future. Because I think the only alternative to it is something which is going to be Antichrist. Like let's say the return to paganism. So it's like you have this return to paganism. It's not the actual paganism from the time of the Scandinavians. It's like it's the thing that Christians said it was, and now you're trying to be the thing that Christians accuse pagans of being. You see what I'm saying? It's like this weird thing where you can't, you're actually playing an Antichrist role without even knowing, because you're in the Christian story and you're wanting to deconstruct it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting for me because recently I had a conversation with Marianne Tupy, who is, I believe he's the founder and editor of humanprogress.org.
Mhm.
And Marianne was telling me all these ways in which, the world has got better. If you take of it through, technology, literacy rates, child mortality, wages, travel, all these kind of data-driven facts. Yet comparatively, if you look at many of the problems from social fragmentation, but not just between, men and women. There's racial hostilities, wars, nihilism. Um, they seem to be two quite competing worldviews. Um, and I'm just curious, where do you kind of stand, I guess, between those things about the world going better versus the world going worse? Which kind of direction is your seesaw tipping in?
Yeah. If you conceive of better as the increase in power, okay, and the increase in freedom in the sense of being able to do what you want, right? That's not actually, I think, what freedom is, but let's say that aspect of freedom, which is your capacity to do what you want and the power to do what you want, and the amount of choice and variation that is available to the human experience, then I would say that we've obviously gotten better in that sense. But I think reducing better to that is not only wrong, but is deeply, deeply wrong, because humans actually, the place where they find the most meaning is in purpose. The place where they find the most satisfaction is in meaning and purpose, rather than in pleasure and in the capacity to have a full belly. Like, having a full belly is wonderful. I don't want to criticize that at all. It's an amazing thing. Like, I want to be careful not to make it sound like I'm diminishing the great accomplishments that the human race has done. But I think that it's important to understand that this has often been done to the detriment of how humans find meaning and purpose, and how humans are connected to higher identities and higher realities. And so because of that, then the more a person is satisfied in their material desires, the more danger they might have of actually falling into despair and falling into nihilism and suicidality and addiction and all these things. Because you could say that in some ways the lack of meaning with the capacity to do whatever you want is the worst position you could be in. And some people describe hell, for example, as actually you getting exactly what you want all the time. That is what hell is. Hell is your desires being full to the max, right? It's like, that image of Homer Simpson, if you've seen it, where it's like, oh, you like donuts, right? Well, now eat all the donuts in the world, right? It's like that is actually destructive to the human soul. Um, I would say that, like, a good example is porn. Like, porn's a great example. Like, the hell of the person that is addicted to porn is the porn addiction itself. Right?
Yeah.
It is the capacity to access every single, sexual, particular sexual desire that you want, and to be able to go dig into that as much as possible, that it takes up as much of your time, of your energy, of your vision as possible. And then you find yourself on the other end of that as being completely empty and hating your life. And so that is the danger of thinking that material wealth is the end all of progress.
It reminds me of the Charles Bukowski quote when he says, "And when nobody wakes you up in the morning, and when nobody waits for you at night, and when you can do whatever you want, what do you call it? Freedom or loneliness?"
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a powerful quote. Um, Man, there's just a couple more questions I would love to ask you
Sure.
if you've got the time.
Yeah.
Um, what one person that I think, of course, that I know that you've done a lot of public facing work with is, of course, Jordan Peterson, and I'm sure you've been asked this question many a time. But I'm just curious, when it comes to, I guess, conversations about transcendent matters, spiritual matters, what do you think that, I guess, Jordan's contribution has been to that conversation?
Well, I think Jordan acts as a bridge, and I think that that's really, in some ways, even the way that I was attracted to his work really at the outset, which is that I had been working on certain things and certain ideas with my brother for many years, but it was like there was something missing to connect it to the culture. And when I heard Jordan, I was like, that's it. He's connecting the dots. He's able to bring the ideas across from each other. And so I think that in that way, he's been a very powerful like door for people, especially people that have been jaded about their their heritage, their religious heritage, or they had kind of moved away from it because they thought it was insufficient and that it was silly and superstitious and nonsense. And he's been able to help them see it afresh, see it anew, and connected to connected to cognitive science, to the ideas of complexity and emergence and all of these ideas. And it's been a massive help. And I think that I think this is gonna I think that single-handedly, I think Jordan Peterson turned the new atheist movement back on its head. And that the aggressive culture winning stance that the new atheists had, in the early 2010s, let's say, is gone. Like, it's gone. They're actually on the retreat, and on the they're on the defensive. And I think Jordan Peterson has done that almost single-handedly, which is an astounding thing to watch, to be honest. Um, and so we can be really grateful to him for that. And so, the thing to watch is to see, how far he's going to take his own conclusion. That's the big discussion about Jordan, is like, then what? Like, what does it mean? I don't know. Like, he hasn't totally decided yet what it means, like what his own conclusions mean, because he tends to take things from the psychological point of view, right? He kind of limits himself in the way that Jung limits himself in his work, which is to say, I don't say anything about the metaphysical claims. I'm just talking about how this is an analogical, like how these religious stories or religious practices are analogical to perception, to the way in which humans create meaning, participate in meaning. And so he's been able to kind of save himself on that front, but it'd be interesting to see in the next few years what direction he takes.
There's many notable figures, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, for instance. I'm kind of curious, in terms of, and I can imagine I could probably guess what you've got to say, but I'm really curious in terms of how you answer this. In terms of, I guess, what they've brought to the conversation, particularly, I guess, Richard, because he was a very prominent figure in it. In terms of, I guess, the messages that they've been sharing, do you think that, I guess, it's been a net positive, a net negative? How do you kind of view that?
I would say that in the final analysis, it's a net positive. It's a difficult one, but it's a net positive because one of the things that happened in the 19th and early 20th century is that a lot of Christians had basically become materialists with a Christian veneer, right? It's like we're basically just material, like 19th century type materialists with a Christian veneer on top. Um, and because of that, the meaning of the stories just became completely like, what are we talking about? Like, okay, so God becomes a man and then he's killed so that you won't go to hell. What the hell are you talking about? Like, this is absolute. Like, what, really? And so I think that the what the new atheists were in some ways was a kind of clarion call to say, this is nonsense, folks. Like, all this is absolute nonsense. If you take it the way that you've been presenting it, even yourselves, this is absolute nonsense. Um, and so I think that it was very much a wake up call. Um, and it was in a way a call for Christians to go deeper. And I think, like I said, but the other thing that makes it positive, and this is the trickier one, is that their version of religion is also so superficial, which is not totally their fault. It was also a superficial version of religion that the religious people themselves had. But their version of religion is so superficial that often you just have to help people see one glimmer of powerful meaning in the religious experience and in the religious stories to shake someone out of their hypnotism, to shake someone out of their new atheist hypnotism, because it's so stupid and ridiculous and nonsense and superstitious and dumb. And so it's like, oh, what did you think about this? And then they're like their whole mind gets blown. Not everybody, obviously, some people that doesn't happen to, but I have seen people to who that happens to, which is, oh, wait a minute, I was told that this story in Genesis, which is stupid nonsense. And then you're like, well, it's not stupid nonsense. It's actually very powerfully constructed narrative that can help you show how it's in some ways a map of reality. It'd be like an ontological map of hierarchies of beings. And it's like, oh, really? And then all of a sudden you have their attention. So in that inadvertently, I think the new atheists kind of, set up their own demise in doing that and arguing down and representing the dumbest, most, kind of uneducated grandma version of Christianity, rather than reading the mystics and reading the great theologians and trying to really get to the end of what that was talking about.
Back in 2018, 2019, there was a group of public intellectuals, colloquially named the intellectual dark web, that I think for many people represented a kind of euphoria of intellectual nuance about having conversations that you couldn't find anywhere, that escaped the so what you're saying is kind of journalism. Um, and I'm sure there are many people also out there that kind of didn't want that kind of group. Um, but as an aside, it seems now, particularly conversations we've had this on this show with other members of this group, it seems like that group is now extremely fragmented. I'm just curious, how do you kind of view, I guess, what happened there? I mean, do you have any kind of analysis of what went on?
Yeah, I mean, I I never considered myself. I never liked that appellation. Like I think you could probably find a very early tweet of mine where I said I have never been part of the intellectual dark web and I don't identify with it. Uh, I think there was something that was a little superficial, I guess, about it. It played its role probably, and the role that it played was pointing out to what extent the conversations in regular media were kind of superficial and were also, like you said, the way in which that journalism framed certain people was just a complete lie and was it would never try to really get to the bottom of things. And so I think that Joe Rogan, especially, I think that Joe Rogan is more than the intellectual dark web, has been really a light in the sense that, he just drives in and it's like, you're in for 3 hours, folks. You can't pretend for 3 hours or just try, right? And he just brings stuff out. Like he's able to bring stuff out, and he's doesn't try to do. I mean, I've seen him do a few gotchas, but not that much. He tends to leave space for the person to defend themselves. Even if he's going to do a bit of a gotcha, be like, all right, well, now you've got all the space to wiggle yourself out of this if you want to. And I think that type of conversation, it's modeled a lot of the what I think are the true conversations that you can find online now. And so that is something extremely valuable. As to the actual constituents of the intellectual dark web, I think that it was a little arbitrary, and and I don't think, I think that I don't want to point fingers at anybody, but I think that there are some members of the intellectual dark web which were never really that. Like they were never really what was said about them, that are into completely honest discussion, and when trying to misrepresent their enemy or whatever. Like I think that we've seen, especially in the Trump era, we've seen that some of those members are willing to misrepresent things, and they do it blindly. They're not doing it on purpose, but they're misrepresenting certain realities. So,
Yeah. Man, I love this, and I gotta say, I really, really, really enjoyed speaking to you. Man, tell these guys where they can connect with you, any work that you're up to that you would love our audience to check out, and any links at all. Please, please tell us where to go.
yeah, well, the best place to go for what I'm doing is to my website, thesymbolicworld.com, and there you'll find pretty much everything I'm doing, whether it's, the my YouTube series, whether it is, I also published several books in the past few years, fiction books, and there's all kinds of stuff, courses that we're doing. So that's the best place to go. Or on YouTube, you can also find me at Jonathan Pageau on YouTube, or Symbolic World. Search that online. You'll find everything that's related to what I'm doing.
This has been a great pleasure. I always enjoy learning from you and picking your brain about things, and I'm really, really excited to get this one out. So man, thanks again. So thank you so much for the time.
This is great. Thanks, Joseph.